Hey everyone, if you're just joining, we're just going to let everyone come in and then we'll start in a couple of minutes. If you're just coming in, pop in the chat where you're listening in from. I'm always fascinating where people are around the world. We had people from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, all around the world in the last one. So please, anywhere from Barnet through to Baku, we want to hear where people are coming in from. I'm guessing that's over London. Is that right? And we'll start in about a minute. Yeah, so we got with me, that's 2 in London. Edenbridge and Kent. We're all pretty close to each other today. Bath. Is that your dog, Ali?
Yeah, sorry.
Dogs are allowed. Dogs are welcome. Louise from Manchester. Oh, Belgium. My first. Okay. I'll have to look that up on Google Maps. Cool. We'll start in about 30 seconds. Iceland. How cool is that? Suffolk. Good old Suffolk. Yeah. Big respect from the Suffolk crew. Cool. Let's kick off. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving up your time today to come and listen to us. Today is a topic of employee ownership. I've got together some amazing experts on it. We're going to talk about everything about from what it is to why it's useful, why we think it's a good idea, and we're going to get into loads of data on it as well. And before I give the context, I think it'd be good to get our panelists. I'll introduce myself and then we'll go around the room. So I'm Matt. I'm co-founder of the Happiness Index, and I'm going to be trying to ask some questions to this group today and get some insight for the listeners in. So, Ali, as I see it on my screen, you're first up, so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Ali. I'm from Happy Business. I'm a specialist consultant working with businesses that are particularly interested in moving into employee ownership, succession planning. But at the heart of running a successful business, you need a happy leader. So I spend a lot of my time with founders of SMEs in the main, helping them to work out how they can be happier and therefore their teams.
I must say, Ali, that's one of the things that gets forgotten all the time about running a happier business. Is actually nicer for whoever's leading it. So we'll come back to that. We're going to divide up Matt and Matthew today. So I'll go by Matt, and then we've got Matthew Dennison. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, Matthew.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Matthew Dennison. I am the Managing Director of Blue Flame. A quick bit about Blue Flame. We're a heating electrical business based in Cornwall, England. We are 102 staff. We've been operating for 36 years. And last year, in April, we transitioned to employee ownership. So we're a 100% employee-owned business. And we're coming up to our first year anniversary of being employee-owned.
Very cool. Can't wait to get into the detail of that and discuss some data. James, please introduce yourself.
Morning, everyone. And Matt, thanks for having us. My name's James Delavine. I'm the Chief Executive of the Employee Ownership Association, which is a small community or a growing community of employee-owned businesses. In fact, it's growing pretty quickly. We'll get more into the detail of what employee ownership is and what's driving that growth, I think, in a minute. But we effectively convene and support businesses to become or learn about employee ownership, and then we advocate that in various networks. And that's why it's great to work with you guys today, is because we've demonstrated there's a strong alignment between the work you guys do and the work that many of our members do.
Thanks, James. So a bit of context for everyone. It's been a really busy few weeks in the world of well-being and happiness. For those that don't know, the World Happiness Report was out last week. Go and look it up, give it a read. It's a fantastic report. The Nordics come out quite high as per normal, but it is a really good reminder of the things that drive happiness are really basic human things like community, ownership of that community, and some of the factors that we're going to go back today. There's one other thing that we want to touch on. There's a new piece of research out. If you look traditionally at career happiness and you plot it on a graph, it looks like a U shape. So you've got like your happiest when you're 18 and when you're 65. And then when you're my age, you're right down the bottom at the most unhappiest bit. And there's many different macro reasons for that. But generally speaking, when and I use myself as the example, you might have young children and you might have aging parents that you're supporting alongside a stressful career. So that's a traditional graph. However, research in the last couple of years is showing that is changing quite drastically. And with that portion, like 18 to 25, that was always one of the happiest moments of people's careers, is hugely sliding. And we will come back to that later today, and also how employee-owned businesses can actually help on that. So that's just a tiny bit of macro stuff on happiness across the world. But before we get into it, James, you've got the hardest job today. You have to actually explain to us, what is an employee-owned business? Like, we get the words, but take us through it.
I mean, the title is it does sort of pass the Ron Seal test in our eyes, right? So it is exactly what it says it is. But it's a relatively niche and small part of the UK economy. So there are just shy of 2,300 employee-owned businesses at the moment, but just over 10 years ago, there were 300. Now, there are some well-known names in the mix. We were lucky 10 years ago, there was the John Lewis model, which most people will know that their employees are partners of that business. So employee ownership is a form of ownership that enables a business to share the wealth that is created amongst its employees. The most dominant model in the UK at the moment is something called the Employee Ownership Trust. Now, the trust was introduced in 2014. It was a coalition government initiative. And it took the learnings of the likes of John Lewis and sort of codified it in modern business legislation and company house legislation. And effectively, a business can transfer or sell its shares into a trust. And typically what happens, and we're going to hear more from a business that's been through this process recently, is an exiting founder, so an entrepreneur, someone who started and grown their business and who's looking for their exit, is thinking, well, what are my options? I could sell my business to private equity. I might consider a management buyout. I might look at sticking my business alongside another one and merging in a group. But increasingly, we're seeing founders looking for an exit that enables them to protect the legacy that they've built. And employee ownership is a fantastic mechanism for that. So they effectively transfer their share ownership into a trust, and the trust acts as a corporate entity on behalf of the benefits of everyone, all employees. So if you enter that business, you're effectively benefiting from the trust, and the trust is overseeing the strategic decisions that the day-to-day business operations are making. So it's a really tidy win-win scenario. It's great for the exiting founder because it enables them to manage their exit in a really considered way. It enables them to protect everything they've built and also over the longer term, reward those that have supported them on their journey. And it's a win for the employees because, and we'll get into this in a minute, it's a mechanism that allows employees to have a real voice and say in their work. So it's definitely a win-win scenario. And at the moment, there are some really favorable tax incentives attached to selling your business to employee ownership. And that is all combined driving the growth. And we're seeing significant numbers of businesses considering employee ownership as their exit route. So we are anticipating that by 2030, there'll be 6, maybe even 7,000 employee-owned businesses or more in the UK, with hundreds of thousands of employees having a greater stake and say in their work.
James, just a quick one before
Sure.
we move on. The numbers are going up, but they're still relatively small, aren't they? And I sit here thinking, well, this is all a great idea, and as you say, it is win-win. What do you think have been the main barriers? Like why more organisations haven't gone down this route traditionally, and has those barriers been removed or are they being removed?
The biggest barrier early on was awareness. So there was a mechanism in legislation, but the people that business owners will speak to typically when they're thinking about exiting will be their accountant and it might be a family accountant, or it might be a lawyer thinking about what are my options. And unless those, we call them sort of that advisor community, were aware of the trust model, they were unlikely to encounter it. No one was going to table it in front of them to say, have you thought about doing this? But what we've seen over recent years, largely in part due to the work of the association and our kind of market development, is actually a real growth in the number of advisory firms understanding EO. So that's been the biggest barrier. Then there are those that are skeptical. And I guess, Ali, you could talk about this a little bit, but actually it sounds too good to be true. And it maybe speaks to your global happiness sort of report. If it sounds too good to be true, surely it's too good to be true. Surely in the modern age, there can't be a win-win scenario anymore. But actually, so there's a little bit of skepticism. And that was reinforced by it being a very small community. But as we scale and more people talk about it, and Matthew, you probably talk about it in your supply chains, etc. It's becoming a bit more well understood, both in terms of the mechanics, but also the credibility of the model. So we're just on that growth journey towards building credibility and awareness in the key audiences.
So James, I'm going to keep you working. I'm going to bring Ali in on that point, but there's one last point that I just want to you didn't realize you're going to work this hard today, did you? And so if someone's like heard this and they're listening and they're thinking, well, where do we go? Where's the best place for someone who's interested to go for information?
There's two places. One is speak to another business that's already done it. So as more and more businesses transition to employee ownership, they cover all parts of the UK. In fact, it's global. And they're in almost every sector. So they're in every part of the UK economy. So speak to another business that's done it, because actually it's really important to get that B2B experience. But we, as an association, as a membership body, we host loads of great content, webinars, but a bit like this, that really get into the weeds of, if you're thinking about this, these are the types of considerations that you as an exiting founder, or maybe as an incoming MD, might need to know if you're going to be running an employee-owned business.
Yeah, thanks, James. Ali, I'm going to bring you in on that point. On that,
Matt, sorry to butt in, but I've got a really interesting point about how speaking to other businesses is so important when trying to actually understand the facts about employee ownership. And my personal journey with it was, our founders did all the research, they did all the legalities, trying to understand it, and said, this is right for us, and then started bringing us on board with myself and the other director that were going to take over from the founders, started bringing us on board. And our perception at the time was that it was like a bit of a cult for tax dodging business owners. That was the honest truth. That's how we thought. This is only in favor of the founders.
Yeah.
When we went to the employee ownership conference, which I'm sure James will talk about in a bit, our intention and our focus was to really unpick what actually employee ownership meant to the employees, not the founders. Now, thankfully and positively, the conference was fantastic, and there was 1,000 people in a room where we could go and talk endlessly about the benefits and the facts and the truth. And we had every side of the coin, and came away from the conference going, actually, this is phenomenal. So it is that education, it is that research, it is speaking to people to get. You can read anything online and not get the true meaning of what it actually is. So yeah, research and speaking to people is key.
Well, that's really great, Matthew, because that does bring Allyson in, because that's what we would just. Matthew's given a brilliant example there, hasn't he? Do you see this skepticism quite a bit there?
So it's really interesting. I see fear from founders of how they're going to exit. Okay. And my journey into an understanding of EO was I worked in a previous life. I worked in business support, publicly funded business support, and we took a group of businesses through how you exit your business. And we got all of the professional bodies around the table, like you say, the lawyers, the solicitors, 4 or 5 businesses that had done it successfully. Some had gone the private equity route, all manner of things. And they were talking about how hard and how awful the experience had been. And at the time, I was working intensively with a business, two co-founders, and they were struggling with what they were going to do next. And I'd met a brilliant guy called, and I will name drop him because he's fabulous, and I'm sure James will concur. Christian Wilson, who is an EO specialist lawyer. He worked for a firm that explored it. And I think it's a real, it's very interesting that a lot of the professional services companies are going down the route themselves, because it is a brilliant and a fascinating model. Christian came and gave a talk to this business, and all of the 5 exiting founders went, why didn't I know about that when I went through this process? Because if you're a founder that really cares about your people, then one of your biggest fears when you sell your business is what's going to happen to my people. Yeah. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because those founders out there that want that really positive exit from their business, that yes, is tax efficient. Goodness me, who doesn't want a tax efficient exit? But actually the overriding benefit of EO is that if you really care about your staff, and if your staff really care about your business, this is a perfect win-win situation. And that's the kind of situation when I met the founders of Blue Flame. 2 guys who had run this business. They'd started it as very young guys. Weirdly, they were best friends. They'd grown a brilliant business, and they were like, okay, how do we do this? And they built this fantastic team of people that they didn't want to hand over to a private equity company or a bigger business that was wasn't going to treat them in the right way. So James will always say, and if you're part of the EO community, if you've met one EO business, you've met one EO business, because they are all different. The Blue Flame story, and I'm sure Matt will tell you a little bit more, an incredibly brave transition, because Mark and Paul recognized that they needed some help in transitioning the leadership team into EO. They knew that Matt and Grant would be on board. They talked to them very, very early on, but 9 months before the transition happened, we sat down and worked together, and we tried to codify the DNA of Blue Flame. Why had it been so successful? What opportunities did it have going forward? And we wrote the blueprint of Blue Flame that gave everybody the kind of the confidence, the coming together of what they wanted it to look like. So these guys, on the 1st of April, they went into employee ownership, and Mark and Paul retired. And that's incredibly brave. Quite often the founders will stay on for a period of time. But Matt and Grant were ready. They were ready for it. They were really, really well prepared for it. I'm sorry. I think I answered your question.
You did. And it brings me back to Matthew, because I don't think we can beat his quote of a cult for tax dodging founders. So we should think that's the bar. I just want to set that high. I'm imagining you're telling me it's been all a mistake, Matt, and you want to undo it all. Tell us about, it's year 1, is it? We're in year 1. Tell us how it's gone.
It went down brilliantly with the staff. We, with Ali's support, carefully planned out how we were going to communicate it with the staff so that it was a positive, factoring in, you're all going to be owners, our leaders are leaving, and you've got 2 new leaders that started life as apprentices 25 years ago, so it was a big shock that the planning made really, really successful. Now, going through, we transitioned successfully. Are we the pinnacle of employee ownership business? No, we're not. We're a year 1 company. We're still learning. We're still planning. We're still looking at how we do things. And we look up to the businesses that are doing it really well. But the reality is, Matt, is they've been doing it a long time. All right. And one of the key things I remember was speaking to lots of businesses, going to see them, webinars, etc. So many of them went so fast. We need this. We need to be transparent. We need to have an employee council. We need to this. And they're not ready, and we recognise, look, we're going to do this, but baby steps. We've got so much change in the business. Let's manage that change for our people, and then slowly transition into becoming a good employee-owned business. And the reality is also we have a business to run. You know, we're a very seasonal business. So April we go into our quiet period, which we have to manage and make sure that the business is still operating and cash flow is good. And so it's been a learning curve. And you know, we've been strong in our approach with things. So, you know, we would really like a staff council or an employee voice group to represent our team. And we initially set out to the staff saying, 6 months, we're going to do this. So we got to the 6-month period. And then we thought, actually, we're only a couple of months away from the employee ownership conference in November. Let's go and speak to people and see how they put an employee voice group in. So we did that, and then we get into our busy period in winter, and it's like, well, we're quite busy now, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to get this in place.
Yeah.
And now, you know, we want to put desperate to put in an employee voice group, and you know, to make governance for the staff. But equally, we've got the government doing their thing and imposing costs onto all businesses, which we're carefully trying to navigate. And then there's a bit of a balance for us of, like, you know, running a business and being a brilliant EO business, you know. And I think that is the reality is EO is lovely and it's a nice thing to aspire to be, but you also have the day-to-day to deal with as well.
Yeah. Matthew, because we've got you here, and I'd love to just get into your brain a little bit about the process, because it sounded like it was you and another person that became the leaders of the business. An alternative could have been you and that person led an MBO, and then the ownership changes from the founders to you two. But what differentiated this approach? Because there could have been more upside for you on an MBO versus something like this. Can you just talk us through that? I'd like to get into your brain of your thinking on that.
I mean, the reality of a management buyout was it couldn't happen financially for us, really, without difficulty, to be fair. And we wasn't in a position to do that. And for the two of us, and then to go into a bigger pool of managers buying into that, we wasn't particularly happy to do at the time. So that was kind of never truly explored. We had offers from, you know, we're a heating and electrical business, the biggest private organisation in Cornwall. We had offers to buy the business, you know, from many big national firms, Southwest firms, housing associations, because, you know, we've got 70 engineers in the field that are delivering work across Cornwall, so we're quite attractive to people. Though the founders were so strong on this, is the reality is our culture. We have a beautiful culture at Blue Flame. It's been in place for 35 years. We're so proud of it. It's not perfect, but it's the core of who we are. Yeah. The reality is, in our industry, the likelihood is someone would say, we don't need your customer service team. We've got a call center in Devon.
Yeah.
We don't need your warehouse distribution team. We've got a distribution center in Exeter. And so for us, we just felt like if we were to go down that route, the reality is Blue Flame would change overnight.
Yeah.
You know, the core hub of who we are, our culture, our DNA wouldn't be there. So that was too much of a risk for us. Yes, financially it might have worked, but for us, the culture side of things wasn't there. And, you know, I've worked closely with the founders for that senior level, and they were in their early 60s. And even up until 12 months before we transitioned, they did not know the exit route. They knew they were wanting to retire. They knew, but there was nothing on the table that made it work for them. They considered, you know, taking a wage and just stepping back, and we'll just, you know, pay them a dividend. Everything was explored, but we discovered by chance an email about employee ownership, and then that questioned the founders just to have a look at it, and then it just snowballed from there to where we are today.
Wow. I hope that email marketer that set that email campaign gets respect for that. At some
do you
point,
The subject
Go on,
heading was cult for tax dodging businesses.
And you know, the really smart thing that these guys did, and through the work we were doing, we wanted to make sure, because you can hear from Matt, the staff was so important to Mark and Paul as the X2 founders. And before the staff even knew that EO was an option, we introduced the Happiness Index Cultural Assessment Survey, because we wanted to measure how the staff were prior to EO, so that we had a really good, strong sense check. You know, and Matt was saying, you know, there's a fabulous culture at Blue Flame, but could we describe it? Could we kind of clearly define it? Could we say, right, what is it about this culture that we really need to keep working on? But what the Happiness Index survey did is it gave Matt and Grant and the leadership team that insight into what was important to their staff. And that's so much, you know, Matt says, you know, I don't feel like we've done as much as we could have done. They've done loads in terms of, you know, number one, I think, you know, for a successful EO business is to preserve the culture. So, you know, the ability to be able to measure and then measure again and see how that progress, and making sure that we're focusing on the right things, to keep that culture really strong, is where I think the team at Blue Flame, you know, in the medium term, are really going to start to see the benefits of those staff that truly care about the business and the future of the business.
James, I'm going to come back to that point on the data, Ali and Matthew, because I want to get into your data. But James, just listening to Matthew's example, I think Ali said, if you've met one business you haven't met, they're all different. How typical is Matthew's experience to what you see across the board?
There are patterns of behavior, of experiences that we see across the network. So Matthew's story, it's familiar, and actually we acknowledged the approach that you'd taken our annual awards, and you know, you took away an award for being a transition of the year, and that was really, I think, because of the way that you'd approached the internal communications, and that you talked about balance there, Matt, and actually that's the way that you balance that was really important. Listening to you talk, it just makes me think employee ownership and the gains that employee ownership can offer doesn't happen just because you've become employee owned. You have to work at it. Right, this stuff takes investment, and we've codified the areas that you need to invest in the way that the Happiness Index is codified, you know, areas that you know that delivers happy businesses, happy employees. But that takes time, and you actually need to invest in all of these areas simultaneously, but they're not all necessarily in situ, or they're all not necessarily geared up in the right way. And so we hear quite regularly that it doesn't land overnight. It doesn't, you know, you transition from being EO, you're a typical structured business on a Friday, you come into work on Monday and suddenly you're EO. What's changed? Well, everything's changed in terms of opportunity, but in terms of how you feel and behave and your line manager, and nothing's changed. And those changes that you want to put in place, some of them are about protecting what already exists. And for you guys, Matt, at Blue Flame, you reversed into EO. But for some businesses, it's a seismic change. But then those things that you put in place, you have to build over time. And we'd always say, don't rush it. You know, actually take your time, find your feet with it, and then prioritize on the different parts of what we call our EO framework. Which bits of that framework are you going to invest in first, and where? And actually, hopefully, the Happy Index, what that does is help you identify which parts of the business need that investment. So it's a common story. We typically call the honeymoon period, sort of that 3 years, those first 3 years for post-transition is where huge amounts of learning takes place. Lots of change takes place. And then you tend to see typically a bit of a quiet patch where we got this, and then someone leaves. Or maybe the actual founder finally does retire and there's another sort of secondary exit, or senior managers come and go, and then suddenly like, oh, hang on a minute, we've got to reinvest in this. I think if you ask the guys at John Lewis who've been doing this for the longest, they still haven't got it right for today. Because not only have you got to make it right in your business, you've got to respond to the external environment, and that's just constantly changing. So it's not a silver bullet. If it doesn't automatically grant you an upside on your balance sheet. It doesn't give you an upside on your employee engagement scores or whatever scores you're doing. You have to work at it.
Yeah, and I
But
think, I
what you
mean,
do is great.
the great thing is, I mean, and anyone who's married like myself, a 3-year honeymoon is pretty good. I think most of us would have been pretty happy with that. In terms of getting into the data now, the good news is we're going to be able to measure this over the next few years, as a group, and actually share this hopefully back with your community, James. But Matthew, take us back to the beginning of, like, to have risen into your position in Blue Flame. You must have a commercial element about you that people have acknowledged and respected to get there. And then Ali comes to you and tells you about this company called the Happiness Index. You must think, who the hell are these people? What's happiness got to do with us running this business? Take us through why you prioritized happiness and measuring the culture, because not every business does. Like, we know that people see our brand name, and a bit like with EO, there's so many, like, we know it's linked to performance, but there's so many people who think, well, that's just a bunch of hippies. Ali and Matt, they don't have real jobs, like the rest of us. How did that whole start? Talk us about that conversation, please.
So yeah, thank you. It's something we wouldn't have done because we didn't know about it if Ali didn't say about it and bring it to us. And knowing we were going to speak to the staff and say that we are transitioning, and we went from not going employee owned to employee owned within 12 months. So it was really radically quite fast. And Grant, my fellow director, and myself were aware of this for roughly 10 months. And then the staff knew about it for 2 months, and it was very quick. So it was important for us to have a datum point of how the staff were feeling before they knew about employee ownership. And for us, we made the decision to do it in our peak period, which is winter. We're heating engineers. It's really busy. So we were hoping the staff would probably be the most honest, the most frustrated, the most unhappy they could be, to give us a true understanding of how they felt. In the summer, that we quite often have people going home early. It's lovely, not as busy, and probably wouldn't give us that true core feeling of how everyone felt. So we made the decision to go with the happiness survey. Ali sold it to us beautifully. It was something we've never done, or never really pushed the happiness side of things. It was like, is everyone all right? People got a smile on their face, they must be happy enough. But having listened to Ali and to understand the different side of engagement and happiness and how they complement each other, and how some people feel with their head, some people feel with their heart, kind of opened us up to a different way of looking at it. And as engineers, we come from a data-led industry. We love data, and we look at data all the time. So having facts and data about our team that we could cross-check against the world, which is what you guys do, was a really good chance for us to sense check how our staff are feeling against other businesses on a trusted sort of framework. So that was the decision. And then the plan was to do it exactly the same time 12 months later, after we've had sort of 10 months or a few months of employee ownership, to then see how people are feeling.
And so I think if we can, let's dig into that a little bit about how that's changed, because I'm pretty sure James is going to be monitoring this and want to get you on a stage to talk about this to other organizations. But how, like, that's a couple of reference points now. I know we probably can't discuss all of the detail because it's still only just come back, and there's different ways that we need to share, other people need to share it with first. But can you take us into the data at all?
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah. So last year we scored incredibly well compared to the international benchmark. I think we scored above an 8 or 8.1, which was fantastic sort of point to start from. Obviously, understanding that we made some major changes within our business. New leadership team. Now everyone's an owner, by the way, and our founders and directors, our mom and dad, have effectively stepped away. We knew that would create a few ripples and a little bit of unsettled settlement within people, which is just, it's natural. So we expected the scores to be slightly lower, and what we hoped is, having done the survey a second time, we hoped that people would really embrace completing it and filling it out honestly. You know what it's like when you get a survey first time, tick, 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 you know, but knowing that what we did with the survey last time and how we communicated out and how we put things in place because of what came from that original survey, I think people definitely scored more accurately and gave some more constructive feedback. So the results, Matt, came back slightly lower than we did in the first year. So I think it was 8 or 8.1 first year round. This year I think it was 7.6, which is a slight drop. It's not drastic. I think it's slightly expected. And the points where we scored high, you know, there's 21 sort of questions which you gauge your staff on, and the points that scored high are really good for us in the way of culture. So getting on with people, committed to the organisation, enjoyment, trusted, etc., etc. So there's some really high scoring elements to culture and people that means a lot to us, and I'm glad we still scored high on those side of things, Matt. Bits that we scored a little bit lower, opportunities to progress, work-life balance, training, you know, etc., etc. So some of the more business side of things, where, you know, winter's a busy time for us, so work-life balance never scores well. You know, everyone is really, really busy at this time of year. We have opportunities to progress. So we have quite a low retention of staff, and especially within our management team. So we don't have much career opportunities to progress up to a point. So we're trying to work out what that looks like for our staff. So maybe it's not upward progression, but sideways progression or personal development. That might just mean next year that those scores are a little bit higher.
I just want to before I bring Ali in on that, there's a couple of things I just want to pull out for our listeners, which is Matt's passed the first 2 tests here, because one of the first tests is people want to send it out when the easier time. We hear it from retailers all the time. We can't send it out at Christmas. Where really, if you think about it, if you're doing it at the hardest time and you're fixing things at the hardest time, that is going to flow through into your competitiveness with your competitors. So that's test number 1. Test number 2 is not being unhappy when you get lower scores, because for us, it doesn't mean high scores are good and low scores are bad. Just as you are doing now, there are opportunities. You're drilling into opportunities to learn. You're realizing that there might not be hierarchical improvements, but every single person on this call that's listening to this call, all our brains are looking for opportunities for growth. And many organizations dismiss that and they say, well, you can't get promoted. There's only so many levels. But across any workforce, there are opportunities for people to grow and to take responsibility. They're not hierarchical. So I just want to say, definitely for us, you're ticking both of those 2 boxes, Matt. And Ali, anything you want to add into what Matt was saying? Any flavour? I think you're on mute, Ali. Just going back 4 or 5 years to the pandemic that no one wants to bring up.
While we're waiting for Ali, I'll just share a data point, if that's all right. So we see across the network that employee-owned businesses invest more in training and development. Now, that's not necessarily upward promotions, but it's around, I was just looking at the stats, it's about £38,000 more or 12% more than a non-employee-owned business, and that's across sectors, across scales. And that's part of what's contributing to higher productivity, to happier, healthier workplaces. But so I think even the fact that your survey has identified that and you're aware of those, you're probably going to now take proactive decisions and respond to that and keep you up in that top higher quartile of businesses actively looking for investment and development opportunities.
And to pull that point out then, James, that's fascinating, isn't it? Because if the employees own the business, it's seen as an investment, training seen as an investment, not a cost.
Yeah.
But as we know, it has all the upticks of all the other things that come with it, like productivity and so on.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry about the mute thing. Noisy dog. What we found really interesting, and Matt talks about a really high retention of people, because people love working at Blue Flame. But what also happens is the very nature of their industry is that there's a huge amount of training that happens early on in somebody's career. A gas or a heating engineer will go through that incredible learning curve, and then actually they hit a point where the doing is the learning. And I think we picked up in the survey that the biggest area where people are less happy, and they're not unhappy, their scores are lower, is in the 19 to 24-year-olds, and actually the next age group up. So I think, you know, what the survey has helped us to do is understand that, you know, people might have had a steep learning trajectory, and that might have just leveled off a little bit. But also, you know, the bit we really want to dig down into is what's going on with the 19 to 24-year-olds. You know, what is it about their, you know, are they just being brutally honest? Are they the post-pandemic generation who are looking at work very differently? So, you know, we got some stuff to really have a look at and unpick in there, and the survey's really helped us to highlight that.
I think there's just a couple of points on that. I think the first number one thing that we need to bring out about 18 to 24-year-olds is that they're not another species. I think that's always a starting point with this, because there's so much stuff written about this subject that is just totally not true. And I think it's important for us to focus on what we do know. So what we do know is that 19 to 24-year-olds are the same species. And secondly, evolution doesn't happen in a 10, 15, 20-year period. It happens over a longer period of time. So the people that are 18 to 24-year-olds are exactly the same as us. They've just grown up in a different context, in a different time. So they may have different expectations and different requirements. And I think the companies that are struggling here are where they don't have leaders like Matt that are prepared to listen and adapt to the workforce. And there has to be a middle road, because, like you say, you're an EO business, but you're also a business. So work still has to be done, et cetera, et cetera. But that piece of data that I said about the U shape of happiness, there are expectations around things like flexibility that have changed. And some companies will dismiss them and say, well, then that's not important. But that's where I think an EO business has an advantage in this perspective, just like with the training to see these things and understand these things. If I take myself as an example, I have an expectation that I can drop my children at school every day. I wouldn't work anywhere else that couldn't meet that requirement. But 20 years ago, that just wasn't normal, and that isn't something that used to be important for me. So I think the first thing is I want to dismiss all the crazy stuff that you hear, because every generation forever has thought that the next generation doesn't work as hard and are lazy and are entitled and whatever. So we need to take that off the table. But then I think it's about the listening bit. And that's where organizations can try and listen and understand what the different requirements are. So I think if we can, in the follow-up show notes, we'll add in the link to that research study that allows people to go deeper. James, I don't know if you've got anything to add on to that section before we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Just briefly, I think, so we see that employee-owned businesses offer greater work flexibility. So 63% versus 30-something%. Again, I'll share the research so you can share in the post notes. But it's employee ownership creates the space for very authentic discussions around what drives a happy, healthy workplace. What are your expectations? And, you know, Matt, thinking about your council, the sooner you get that in situ, the sooner you'll see more ideas come forward, further support, I would say, on delivering against the survey findings, rather than it just being led to yourself or you and Grant. Look, I think that employee ownership creates the space, and it's authentic as opposed to tokenistic. We will actively listen to you, but you will also be part of the solutions. We will create the mechanisms, the opportunity, the space within the business. If you have a particular way of working or a particular demand of the business, where you can influence that. And I think that's where the magic's happening. It's the business is putting in the structures and the opportunity, and people actively responding, and we call it the ownership mindset, responding really proactively and positively to that. It's two sides of the same coin. And when you get them coming together, that's when you start to see the productivity uptake and highly, more profitable, happier businesses.
So thanks, James. And just before we go on to the final section, there's I just want to say to anyone who's listening, if you've got questions, pop them in the in the chat, because we will go to them at the end. We've got one last section and one last bit that I want to squeeze out of you, Matt, which is your workforce, the employees, the engineers, the people out there. Like my son said to me the other day, like, I wish you had a proper job, because his best friend's dad is a fireman. These people are out there actually doing stuff. Like, they're on the front line. And one of the things we were conscious when we built the Happiness Index is to make sure that it's not just designed for employees that wear a white collar sitting at a desk. Most employees in the world, they're on farms, they're engineers, they're doing stuff. Tell us a little bit about, like, the interaction between, you get the scores and then the employees. Like, tell us about, like, what people are asking you, like the trust of and what people are saying. Are they saying, "Oh, are you monitoring me?" Are they just take us into their world from their perspective, please, Matt?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because our business is, we have roughly 70 engineers working all over Cornwall, live all over Cornwall. They don't come to the office. They're all digital, remote working. So everything's, there's no need for them to come to the office. So we might not see them for weeks at a time. And then we have about 30 people in the office. And what's really great about this happiness survey is the fact you can segment, age, sex, department, level, field staff, office staff, and we have a clear disconnect between how our field engineers feel about happiness, culture, employee ownership, business, everything, and our office staff. When you've got 30 people in the same building of you, it's much more easy for them to feel the passion about EO, business development, processes, happiness, than it is when someone lives 100 miles away ish. All right. So that's a real challenge for us, Matt. It's a great question, because I don't have an answer for it, if I'm being honest. And it's something that we are very mindful of and very aware of, and we've started now asking some of our senior engineers, who are kind of the go-to, the in-between the management team and the engineers, is how we can improve this. What can we do? What do you think? And like I said, we don't have an answer. James, the staff council, would probably answer that beautifully, by the way. So
all in good time.
More reason to go with that. But yeah, working with them, also, we have some people that are absolutely dialed into employee ownership. I want to know, I want to be involved, tell me all about it. And then you've got your middle people who are a bit like, yeah. And then you've got some people who's like, I'm not bothered about it. And it's the same with the happiness survey, to be honest with you. It's I'm not bothered about all the fluff and the happiness, right? Yeah. But then they give you, they do the survey, and but you have some people who are like, we need this, I like this, and it's good. So it's a hard one, and it's something that we haven't solved, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And it's and the reason I brought it up is that, going back to James's point, and he's not paying me to say this, around the council and involving those groups of people, is that it's getting the why over to people, which can sometimes be missed with a survey, because that's the hardest thing. Like, why are we doing it? Because they're busy, aren't they? And then suddenly this survey pops into whatever. So I think that it sounds like the Works Council would be a really good way of doing that. We're going to go into the final bit, because we've only got 5 minutes left, which is my favourite bit. And you can volunteer to go first. Biggest failures in this area of EO? Anyone want to go first? Anyone want to?
I'll jump in. I think it's only fair. So we see people being very nervous about how they communicate it. So when I say, this is ultimately a decision that's typically made by the founders. And there's an apprehension, a nervousness about sharing it too soon, and then a slight almost mistrust of how the team will respond. And so that apprehension slows things down. And actually, you need to be really clear and upfront, I think, early on, pre-transaction, and create the space for really good conversations. So It's the business leaders who convene a big meeting and just land it on people and then expect the world to change. And it's like, oh, hang on, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
I would also say then it's thinking it will just sort itself out. So like I said earlier, you really do need to invest in this to benefit from it. But that's both the business and the individual. You need to respond to your opportunity as a co-owner, and demonstrate that you connect with the ownership that you have of the business. And different people respond in different ways. But yeah, don't go too fast. Make sure you're clear and open about the way the communications, and trust that your team have the skills, the capability to respond positively.
That, James. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Keep them coming. If you've got any that you want, I will put them to the panel.
Just
go next.
My point on that one, Matt, was you're going to make failures. All right, and failure is not a bad thing. But if I said anything or any good bit of advice from today is get expert help, like Ali and the Happy Business team, someone who understands how to guide and direct you. Because if we did this, Blue Flame is a bit like the most unbusinessy business going. We're engineers and we fix boilers and we fix heat pumps. And, Ali really came in and supported us with the direction of how we need to approach employee ownership, also how to improve our business. So seeking expert advice is key.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Ali, anything to add to that?
I think you see your question of what not to do. It's like Matt says, you've got to plan it, and you've got to communicate brilliantly, and you've got to listen brilliantly. You've got to it is a really difficult concept for people to get their heads around. And you imagine gas engineers, like I applied for a job, I didn't apply to run a business. So that got to be patient with people. You've got to listen to people, and to speak to your question, Matt, about how the engineers feel. What they have given us, and even more so this year, is some fantastic feedback that the guys were kind of aware of, but they put it in such a way they go, do you know what, we've really got to look into that. We can do something about that. And I think, for those very practical people that might be a bit cynical of it, what you have to do is when they've taken the time to give you some really good feedback, you've got to act on it.
Yeah, so true, Ali. Got a couple of questions. I'm going to attempt to summarize all of this. Question for Matthew Dennison. Knowing what you know, what would you do differently if you were starting this process again? Bloody, I was about to swear. Brilliant question.
That is a brilliant question. I think understanding the financial impact, because we have the founders to pay off, as far as they've sold the business to the employees, and to have a real understanding of what that means and modeling it into the costs. And then if you can't deliver that, you need to make sure that you've got this agreement with your founders that you're going to pay them. So you need to be able to make sure you fully and truly understand that. And with having to pay that off and invest in employee ownership and training and everything like that, is the financial investment in employee ownership, is understanding that. That would probably be my one bit of advice.
Cool. Got a technical question. Anyone is welcome to answer this one, which is, can employees use salary sacrifice to buy into the business?
So that's not the mechanism we've been talking about today. Blue Flame is 100% owned in trust, which means all the shareholding exists in an employee ownership trust. And then any profits that the business might make go to the trust, and then the trust makes a decision how that's distributed. But that we see increasingly across the network, people transferring, or owners transferring, say 80% of their shareholding into a trust, and running alongside that management incentive schemes, so EMI, SIPs, etc. So that's not a salary sacrifice scheme, but that is a mechanism where you can identify and reward individuals differently, potentially to incentivize them, while you may be paying back the founder's share. The deferred consideration is the technical term. So no, it's not typically. What we haven't talked about today is a form of employee ownership where people actually own the share certificates themselves, direct share ownership. And there are businesses in our network where the majority of the business is owned directly by individuals. And effectively, your share capital grows as the business grows. And then when you leave the business buys back your shares and you leave with a healthy payout. And that's the model that's very, very prevalent across the US. But also there's forms of that here in the UK.
Thanks, James. Right, everyone has been amazing. I am going to try and summarize. I tried to just summarize 3 of the big points that were made today, which is we're never going to forget that point that Matt made, that he first thought that EO was a cult for tax dodging founders. And I think it is a really good point, because there must be loads of other people thinking that. So thank you for bringing that out, and to see the journey to go from thinking that to being an advocate for it is huge. Ali, I just think your point, we could have easily lost this point right early on, which is around codifying the DNA of Blue Flame. Blue Flame has obviously been successful, but there's been a lot of work that's been done to codify that. So as you move forward, that continues and it grows and it becomes part of it. And then, James, I thought you did a brilliant job at the end there, where you just sort of summed up that if you're going to go down this route and you're going to speak to employees, it's not just one meeting. You can't just put a Zoom meeting in called EO, tell everyone about it. And I think James was telling us what we all needed to hear, which is there's a lot of hard work that's got to go into making this successful. But my summary of the whole thing is, it sounds like it's worth it. So I would hope, I hope the panelists are up for it, but I hope we should regroup in a year's time, hear how the story's going, and take it from there. But I just want to say, Ali, James, and Matthew, absolutely brilliant. And thank you for sharing all your insights.
Thanks for having us.
Loved it. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.